Christmas. For so many people, it's a time of joy, togetherness, and love. Families come together, lights sparkle in windows, and the air fills with the smell of fresh cookies and pine trees. But what happens when Christmas loses its meaning? What happens when the world forgets what it's truly about? That's the story I want to tell you today. It's about a man named Nick. He wasn't the kind of person you'd think of as a hero. In fact, most people wouldn't even notice him as they walked by. But Nick's story is proof that miracles can happen, even in the unlikeliest of places. Nick was a man who lived in shadows, invisible to the world around him. He had once been like everyone else, working a job, paying bills, celebrating holidays. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. One year, an illness took his wife from him, leaving him shattered. Not long after, he lost his job, his home, and eventually, even his hope. He became one of those faces you see on the street and quickly forget. A man in a worn-out coat with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. For years, Nick wandered the streets, surviving on scraps and the kindness of strangers. Or rather, the lack of it. The world had grown cold, and so had its people. Christmas was the hardest time of all. It was the season of joy, yet all Nick could feel was the weight of his loneliness. Families would pass him by, children holding their parents' hands, laughing and singing carols. He wanted to feel happy for them, but all he could feel was the ache in his heart. One year, things got worse. The world itself seemed to give up on Christmas. There were no carols, no lights, no laughter. People were too busy, too tired, too caught up in their struggles. It was as if the very spirit of the season had been canceled. Nick, sitting alone under a bridge, thought to himself, maybe Christmas really is dead. That's when it happened. In the middle of a freezing night, as Nick huddled under a thin blanket, he noticed something glowing in the snow. At first, he thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. A small envelope, glowing softly, as if it carried a warmth of its own. Nick reached for it, his fingers trembling from the cold. He opened it and found a letter inside. The handwriting was small and neat, like a child's. The letter read, "Dear Santa, I know the world has forgotten Christmas, but I haven't. I believe in you and the magic of this season. If you can hear me, please remind everyone what Christmas truly means. They need it now more than ever. With love, Lucy." Nick stared at the letter for a long time. He didn't know who Lucy was or where the letter had come from. But something about her words stirred something deep inside him. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the belief behind them. Someone, somewhere, still believed in the magic of Christmas. And for the first time in years, Nick felt a tiny spark of hope. He didn't have much. No money, no home, no family. But he had something more powerful. A purpose. Nick decided he would honor Lucy's wish. He didn't know how, but he was determined to bring Christmas back, even if it was just for one person. The next morning, Nick woke up with a newfound energy. He began by doing small things. He shared his last piece of bread with a stray dog. He helped an elderly woman carry her groceries. He even sang a quiet Christmas carol to himself as he walked through the snowy streets. At first, people didn't notice him. They were too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives. But slowly, things began to change. A kind-hearted baker noticed Nick humming and gave him a loaf of bread. A little boy saw him smiling and handed him a candy cane. A woman who had been rushing past stopped to give him a pair of warm gloves. These small acts of kindness grew, like ripples in a pond. People began to remember what it felt like to give, to connect, to care. Nick shared Lucy's letter with anyone who would listen. He told them about her belief in the magic of Christmas and how she wanted to remind the world of its true meaning. The letter touched people's hearts. They started to think about their own lives, their families, and the things they had taken for granted. Word spread quickly. A retired shopkeeper brought out old Christmas decorations from his attic. A musician offered to play carols in the town square. A group of children decided to make handmade ornaments for a Christmas tree. Before long, the whole town was involved. It was as if Lucy's letter had reignited a flame that had been smoldering for years. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered in the square. They lit up a tree, sang carols, and shared stories. Nick stood at the center, holding Lucy's letter. He read it aloud, his voice trembling with emotion. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, people began to clap, cheer, and hug each other. Just as the celebration reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. A bright star appeared in the sky, shining down on the square like a beacon of hope. People gasped, and children pointed at it with wonder. Nick looked up, tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "Thank you, Lucy." The star became a symbol for the town, a reminder of the magic they had rediscovered. Every year after that, they gathered under its light to celebrate Christmas. They didn't focus on presents or parties. Instead, they focused on kindness, connection, and love. Nick's life changed too. He was no longer Santa of the streets. He became a beloved figure in the town, known for his big heart and his belief in the power of giving. And while he never found out who Lucy was or where her letter had come from, he carried it with him always, tucked safely in his pocket. Lucy's letter taught the town and the world that Christmas isn't about material things. It's about the small acts of love that create miracles. It's about remembering that even in the darkest times, we have the power to bring light to someone else's life. And so, as you listen to this story, I want to leave you with this thought. The magic of Christmas doesn't come from the gifts we give or the decorations we hang. It comes from the love we share and the memories we create. So this Christmas, be someone's light. You never know whose life you might change. Years passed, and Nick's story became a legend in the little town. People would tell their children about the homeless Santa who brought Christmas back. But for Nick, it was never about being remembered. It was about the lesson he had learned, one that Lucy's letter had planted deep in his heart. Nick often found himself thinking about Lucy. Who was she? Was she a real child? An angel? Or was she simply the embodiment of hope, sent to a man who had nearly lost his? He never found the answer, and perhaps he didn't need to. The letter had done its work. It had transformed his life and the lives of everyone around him. As time went on, Nick made it his mission to spread Lucy's message even further. Every Christmas, he traveled to new places, sharing the letter with anyone who would listen. He visited schools, churches, homeless shelters, and even hospitals. Wherever he went, he reminded people that the true spirit of Christmas wasn't in the gifts or the feasts. It was in the small, meaningful acts of love that brought people together. And the letter. It became more than just words on paper. It became a symbol of hope. People made copies of it, hanging it in their homes and sharing it with friends and family. Some even sent it to strangers, believing in its power to touch hearts. Lucy's words traveled far beyond that little town, reaching people in cities, villages, and countries Nick could only dream of visiting. One Christmas Eve, many years later, Nick found himself sitting by a crackling fire in a small cabin. He was no longer homeless, thanks to the kindness of the people whose lives he had touched. He lived a quiet, peaceful life, surrounded by reminders of the journey he had been on: a worn coat, a pair of gloves, a faded photograph of the town square lit up for Christmas. As he sat there, holding Lucy's letter in his hands, a knock came at the door. Nick wasn't expecting anyone, but he opened it to find a little girl standing in the snow. She had bright eyes and rosy cheeks, and she held out a small envelope, just like the one Nick had found so many years ago. "Are you Santa?" she asked, her voice soft and full of wonder. Nick smiled, his eyes misty with tears. "Why do you ask, little one?" The girl held up the envelope. "Because I wrote you a letter. I wanted to say thank you for bringing Christmas back. My mom told me the story about you, and I think you're a hero." Nick knelt down to her level, his heart full. "I'm no hero," he said gently. "I'm just someone who believed in the magic of Christmas. And do you know where that magic comes from?" The girl shook her head, her eyes wide. "It comes from people like you," Nick said, tapping her nose playfully. "People who believe, who share love, and who remind the world what really matters." The little girl smiled, and Nick felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. He watched as she skipped away, her envelope clutched tightly in her hand. And for the first time, Nick realized that Lucy's message wasn't just meant for him. It was meant for everyone. It was a gift that kept on giving, passed from one heart to another, growing stronger with every act of kindness. As the fire crackled and the snow fell gently outside, Nick closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for the gifts he had received, but for the gift he had been able to give. A gift of hope, love, and the reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can create a miracle. And so, this story comes to an end, but its message lives on. In every home where laughter fills the air, in every heart that feels the warmth of love, in every moment when someone chooses kindness over indifference, that is where the spirit of Christmas lives. So this year, let us all carry Lucy's message forward. Let us be the light for someone in the dark. Let us share the gift of love, not just on Christmas, but every day. Because the true miracle of Christmas isn't in what we receive, it's in what we give. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you listen closely on a quiet Christmas night, you might hear the faint sound of a letter rustling in the wind. A gentle reminder that the magic of Christmas is always with us, as long as we believe.